working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on today's headlines. A powerful earthquake struck western Mexico, leaving at least one person dead, sparking panic hundreds of kilometers away in Mexico City on the anniversary of two devastating tremors. No Filipino was hurt in the earthquake, according to DFA spokesperson Maria Teresita Daza. President Bongbong Marcos Jr. enticed more American businesses to invest in the Philippines, assuring them that the country has a robust and resilient economy. Nearly half of the population was displaced by various disasters that occurred in just one decade, according to a study released by the Asian Development Bank and the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. An Indonesian villager, Muslimim, has dedicated his life to conserving native orchid species around Mount Merapi on Java Island, where the exotic blooms had been endangered by volcanic eruptions. And we start with breaking news. A powerful earthquake struck western Mexico today, leaving at least one person dead, sparking panic hundreds of kilometers away in Mexico City on the anniversary of two devastating tremors. No Filipino was hurt in the earthquake, according to DFA spokesperson Maria Teresita Daza. The quake, magnitude 7.7 according to the National Seismological Agency, shook buildings and sent people rushing out into the streets of the capital. Take a look.
Con miedo. La verdad que es increíble que a 5 años vuelva. Sabemos que va a volver a pasar, ¿no? Pero es mucha coincidencia que casi a la hora otra vez de nuevo vuelva a pasar.
Y la verdad es que momentos como este son muy difíciles, sobre todo revives la experiencia pasada, el último sismo sobre todo, y pues nos metemos en una angustia. Ojalá que el gobierno pueda realmente entender lo que la ciudadanía vive en todo momento, no en el sismo, sino también antes y posterior al sismo.
Es un aviso más, ¿no?, de la naturaleza para que hagamos bien las cosas.
Qué gran coincidencia, no sé a qué se deba esto de verdad.
The epicenter was located near the Pacific coast, around 400 kilometers west of the capital and 59 kilometers south of Colcoman in the state of Michoacan. The shaking set off an earthquake alarm in the country's capital, Mexico City, and it struck on the same day as major earthquakes have previously hit Mexico back in 1985 and 2017. Mexico City's earthquake alarms rang out less than an hour after the capital held emergency drills as part of events to mark the disasters of 1985 and 2017. Now, some areas of Mexico City suffered power outages, mainly affecting subway lines that had to be evacuated. The quake triggered dozens of aftershocks, and the most powerful of which was magnitude 5.3. There are approximately 1,200 Filipino nationals residing in Mexico. In addition, genetic studies indicate that about a third of Filipinos sampled from Guerrero have Asian ancestry, with genetic markers matching those of the populations of the Philippines. In tonight's other news, President Marcos in the U.S. graced the New York Stock Exchange to ring the closing bell. Now, in a short exchange with NYSE Vice Chairman John Tuttle, the president said that the U.S. is a vital player in his vision of the country moving forward. Take a look.
Our relationship has gone back for over 100 years between the United States and the Philippines. And as we just earlier today, we had a lunch that was hosted by the U.S.-Philippine Society. And I spoke to them, and we talked perhaps more on the subject of geopolitics. And I explained that it is very clear to me, in my vision for the way that the country will move forward, that I cannot see the Philippines in the future without having the United States as a partner. And although I was referring to the geopolitics of it, and I was referring to the political situation in the region and around the world, that certainly does continue to apply in our exchanges in the economic front. And many of the drivers of our early economy were actually American corporations. Many of the strongest corporate benefactors, really, to government and to the rest of society in the Philippines were coming from the United States. Now, of course, this has evolved as time has gone on, but the strength of that relationship continues. And we envision a further strengthening of those relationships. I believe that the political, economic, diplomatic relations that we make, the partnerships that we forge and that we strengthen now, are going to be extremely necessary for the simple reason that they provide the stability in this highly unstable economic, political, geopolitical, diplomatic environment. This is something that that is central to our thinking when it comes to the economic planning for the Philippines. So again, we have adjusted many of our ways of doing business at the behest of our friends in the United States and of the American businesses that are already in the Philippines. And so I think that will give us great opportunities in the future, and for both our countries, for private corporations, for government-to-government agreements and arrangements. We have really opened up the policy of the Philippines to more of these public-private partnerships, but not only PPPs, but also G2G arrangements, as I mentioned, joint venture between private entities. And it is something that we feel can actually be achieved. So the United States has always been central to that. I cannot overstate really the role that the United States has played in the Philippines in every aspect of our lives. And so this is just a continuing evolution and I believe strengthening of that relationship between the United States and the Philippines. And we are driven together in many ways by forces that exist now in the world, and that I think is something that that we certainly in the Philippines, and I think not in the United States either, that we are resistant to. So it is something that we can I can see as becoming stronger and becoming more robust as we work together towards exploiting properly the new global economy.
Meanwhile, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. also enticed more American businesses to invest in the country. He assured them that the country has a robust and resilient economy. Speaking before the Business Leaders Forum in the U.S., the president shared that his administration is ramping up its efforts to further open up the economy and accelerate the country's recovery from the pandemic. Again, let's listen in.
Trade is back to double-digit growth, with demand for trade partners boosting our exports, and with domestically situated firms importing more inputs in anticipation of rising demand. At the same time, with our commitment to fiscal discipline, the country's debt-to-GDP ratio has improved to 62.1% as of end June this year from 63.5% in the previous year. At the height of the COVID-19 crisis, the government implemented massive stimulus programs to readily support the most vulnerable sectors. Although our borrowings increased substantially during the pandemic, we continue to reduce the cost of our public debt through judicious debt management. Now that the economy is reverting to normalcy, the government is likewise heading back to the path of fiscal consolidation. We will reduce the government debt to GDP ratio to below 60% by 2025 and further down to 51.2% by the end of my term in 2028. Our economy's resilience to crises is recognized internationally. The Philippines has maintained its investment-grade credit ratings throughout the pandemic amid the wave of rating downgrades globally. As we look forward to achieving upper middle income status, we are also gearing up for A territory credit ratings in the medium term. On the external front, we have sufficient buffers against external shocks, supported by steady inflows of overseas Filipino remittances, receipts from business processing, outsourcing, and foreign direct investment. Our gross international reserves stood at $99 billion as of end August, equivalent to 8.3 months of import cover. This remains more than sufficient to cover the economy's foreign exchange needs. Moving on to my second point, our economic development roadmap. In the near term, our top priorities are protecting the purchasing power of families by managing inflation, reducing the scarring effects of the pandemic, and ensuring sound macroeconomic fundamentals. Thus, we are implementing policies that enhance food security, transport, reduce energy costs, and logistical costs, strengthen social protection, and enhance the quality of education and skills training of our workers. As we pursue our short-term agenda, we build the foundations for a stronger, more inclusive future. Our medium-term agenda includes reducing the poverty rate to single digits by 2028 and undergoing an industrial transformation through which science, technology, and innovation and sustainability will drive our industries. In all our endeavors, the private sector must be a partner. We seek partnerships in many areas of our development agenda. In public infrastructure, such as mass transit systems, airports, toll roads, in public services, in digitalization initiatives, in the energy development agenda, in efforts to modernize agriculture, and in programs aimed at strengthening our industries, to just name a few. For American businesses, we offer investment opportunities in areas such as information technology and business process management, or IT BPM, medical products and devices, electric vehicles and batteries, agribusiness and telecommunications infrastructure and services. Despite external headwinds, the Philippines' economy's resilience, reinforced by sound policies and decisive leadership, makes us confident about our future.
Meanwhile, Secretary for Foreign Affairs Enrique Manalo met with the Foreign Minister of Norway, Anniken Huitfeldt, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting in New York. Now, Secretary Manalo and Foreign Minister Huitfeldt highlighted the strong ties between the Philippines and Norway and affirmed the primary importance the two countries place on maritime affairs. Secretary Manalo recognized the Royal Norwegian government for its firm commitment to support the peace negotiations in the Philippines. In addition to discussing ways to promote bilateral cooperation, both sides exchanged views on international affairs. Meanwhile, Secretary of Foreign Affairs Enrique Manalo also had a substantive discussion with Korea's Foreign Minister Park Jin on the sidelines of the 77th UN General Assembly in New York on the 19th of September U.S. time. Both officials committed to elevate Philippine-Korean bilateral relations to a strategic partnership banking on deep and close ties that have spanned more than 7 decades. The Philippines and Korea envision a strategic partnership to include include increased high-level engagements, closer maritime cooperation, increased collaboration in addressing common security challenges, expanded cooperation in trade and investments, and in science and technology, and even closer people-to-people exchanges through tourism, education exchanges, and labor cooperation. Secretary Manalo also took the occasion to express his anticipation in the signing of the 2022-2026 framework arrangement concerning loans from the Economic Development Cooperation Fund, which will pave the way for the implementation of more development cooperation projects. Now, Korea's participation in the Philippines' infrastructure development, including the construction of highways, railways, ports, and airports, is an important aspect of the Philippine-Korean bilateral relations. To Myanmar now, where a new UN Human Rights Office report published on Friday has urged more countries to stop selling arms to the military junta that seized power 18 months ago. Following widespread international condemnation for the coup and the general's violent repression of opposition voices, the report's author said that several states continue to supply weapons to those now controlling the country. Some progress had been made to economically isolate the Myanmar military, according to the report, which was commissioned by the UN Human Rights Council. But it also noted that much more action was needed, not least targeted measures that should focus on the military's access to foreign currency. The country's de facto authorities had failed to govern in meaningful and sustainable ways and had continued to repress and terrorize the Myanmar people, according to the report. The latest information from Myanmar indicates that poverty has increased at least twofold since the coup. The public health system has effectively broken down, according to the UN Rights Office report, which added that more than half of all school-aged children have not been to school in 2 years. A Rohingya man was killed and at least 6 more people injured when mortar shells fired from Myanmar landed inside Bangladesh. Now, some 1 million, mostly Muslim Rohingya refugees live in dozens of camps in Bangladesh's southeastern border district of Cox's Bazar after vast numbers fled a crackdown by the military of the Buddhist majority Myanmar in 2017. At the same time, across the border in Rakhine State, the Myanmar military regularly clashes with the Arakan army, which has for years fought a war for autonomy for the area's ethnic Rakhine population. Dil Muhammad, the leader of a Rohingya group living on the border at Tumbru, said the 18-year-old man was killed when mortar shells fired from Myanmar hit the area late Friday, sowing panic among the refugees. It's the latest in a series of incidents where shells have exploded in Bangladesh, but the first to cause a fatality. Earlier this month, Dhaka expressed deep concern over falling mortar shells inside Bangladesh territory, indiscriminate aerial firing from Myanmar in the bordering areas, and airspace violation from Myanmar. And nearly half of the Philippine population was displaced by various disasters that occurred in just 1 decade, according to a study released by the Asian Development Bank and the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, or IDMC. Now, the Philippines has been the country most affected as it experiences between 5 and 10 destructive tropical cyclones every year, making it one of the countries most at risk of extreme weather events in the Asia and Pacific region and globally, according to the report. In the report, Disaster Displacement in Asia and the Pacific, a business case for investment in prevention and solutions, ADB and IDMC said between 2010 and 2021, a total of 49.3% of Filipinos were displaced by disasters in the country. During the period, the biggest disaster was Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, which triggered the displacement of 4.1 million people. Now, this accounted for over a fifth of the 19.7 million disaster displacements in the Asia-Pacific region for that year. Haiyan in total caused the displacement of 5.1 million people, not only in the Philippines, but also in Palau, China, and Vietnam. It was deemed as the largest displacement event caused by a storm. In tonight's other news, the UN chief called a special summit on education a day before world leaders meet for the annual General Assembly. Although a number of key officials, including U.S. President Joe Biden, delayed their arrivals in New York due to Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. Again, let's listen in.
Every single person in this room knows education transforms lives, economies, and societies. But we also know we must transform education, because education is in a deep crisis. Instead of being the great enabler, education is fast becoming a great divider. Some 70% of 10-year-olds in poorer countries are unable to read a basic text. Either they are out of school or in school but barely learning. Education systems take little account of lifelong learning, and teachers are undertrained, undervalued, and underpaid. The digital divide penalizes poor students, and the education financing gap yawns wider than ever. A new vision for education in the 21st century is taking shape. Above all, quality education must support the development of individual learners throughout his or her life. And it must help people learn how to learn, with a focus on problem solving and collaboration. It must provide the foundations for learning, from reading, writing, and mathematics to scientific, digital, social, and emotional skills. It must also develop students' capacity to adapt to the rapidly changing world of work.
Most of you know what exactly needs to be done. You must not make small, stingy, and short-term pledges, but commit to uphold the right to complete education and close the funding gap once and for all. You must use the power you have to take action. Allocate 20% of your budgets to education. High-income countries increase aid, cancel debts, and set fair global tax system so that low-income countries can spend more on girls.
Now, to make the vision a reality, Mr. Gutierrez highlighted 5 commitment areas, beginning with protecting the right to quality for education for everyone, everywhere, especially girls and those in crisis hotspots, emphasizing that schools must be open to all without discrimination. He appealed to the Taliban in Afghanistan, lift all restrictions on girls' access to secondary education immediately. Third, he also advocated for schools to become safe, healthy spaces with no place for violence, stigma, or intimidation. To achieve the fourth target, that the digital revolution benefits all learners, he encouraged governments to work with private sector partners to boost digital learning content. He also urged countries to protect education budgets and funnel education spending into learning resources. The UN General Assembly is back in person after 2 years of the pandemic, with leaders required to show up if they wish to speak. The Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Erlanga Hartarto, has confirmed the government's preparation ahead of Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. Take a look. Now, all progress in the preparation is underway in terms of both the working group and the engagement group. We are also monitoring confirmation of attendance from heads of states. During the past 2 months, we have been hosting many ministerial meetings. Erlanga told reporters at the Presidential Palace compound in Jakarta. The heads of states invited to the G20 summit have also confirmed their attendance to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Erlanga said the minister also pointed out that the central government and regional governments will convene a coordinating meeting on evaluating fuel price that will specifically touch on the issue of inflation, adding that the meeting is set to take place in the East Java provincial capital of Surabaya. The news continues here on ASEAN in Focus. We'll be back. Welcome back. Snap happy tourists and cafe owners along Hanoi's popular train streets speak of their disappointment as the Instagram hotspot was ordered to close due to safety concerns just weeks after reopening following a long COVID-19 closure. Let's take a look.
For me, it was a bit of a disappointment because this whole track is actually very long and there's so much to do and places to visit. So initially I wanted to go to a cafe that actually had a top level, and it gave a perspective on the train actually going through the actual between the houses from a higher point of view, and that was very interesting in my point of view rather than putting ourselves in place of actually being in danger. But in the end it is what it is, and I think a lot of people can actually still take photos, but it just takes a big part of the tourism out of it.
Just say it's a little bit disappointing that it's closed. However, we understand things like this happen, but there's still many more things to see in Vietnam, so we're still happy.
The narrow corridor in the Vietnamese capital drew hordes of tourists before the pandemic, each eager to grab a selfie or watch a train rumble past one of the fashionable eateries set just a meter from the track. Now, safety concerns prompted the street shutdown in 2019, but many businesses quietly opened in recent weeks, keen to cash in on the tourist revival after Vietnam reopened to visitors earlier this year. Built by colonial rulers, the railway once transported goods and people across French Indochina and is still in use by Communist Vietnam state-run rail company. The stretch of tracks on Train Street, once in an area occupied by drug users and squatters, was transformed after social media users began sharing photos and locals realized the business potential on Friday. The kilometer-long line was blocked off by police, though a nearby section of track remained open. A local official told state media the businesses along the street were violating railway safety rules. Indonesian villager Muslimim has dedicated his life to conserving native orchid species around Mount Merapi on Java Island, where the exotic blooms been endangered by volcanic eruptions. The 56-year-old, who goes by one name like many Indonesians, is a self-taught conservationist with no formal background in botanics. Again, let's listen in.
Dengan mata kepala kami sendiri bahwa di hutan yang dulu memang kaya raya, baik bisa dikatakan flora faunanya, tapi dengan adanya peristiwa itu luluh lantah, berbagai jenis spesies khususnya orsidase itu di sana bisa dikatakan hampir habis lah. Yang jelas kalau di hutan itu masih banyak orsidase atau anggrek di hutan, itu keindahan hutan itu nampak nyata. Seperti beliau, anggrek itu sendiri adalah mahkotanya hutan. Jadi hutan tanpa ada suatu spesies orsidase seperti hutan tanpa mahkota.
Now his work began after lava and ash ripped through the area from the powerful eruptions of Mount Merapi, the last major one in 2010. But many were destroyed by the ash clouds that fell on the land below the volcano. So he set about saving their wilting fortunes. Over the years, building 2 bamboo greenhouses where he could preserve the most special kinds of orchids. He also joined the local government's effort to find the surviving orchids as he and his neighbors explored what remained. Now, Muslimin mostly works alone and wants those who enter the forest to leave the orchids to blossom instead of trying to profit from them. Finally, in our news, taking the scenery of calm lakes against lush mountains at the Balinsasayao Twin Lakes Natural Park in Negros Oriental. Here's an immersive virtual tour of the only remaining rainforest in the island of Negros. Take a look. Thank you for joining us here on ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.